then begs the question, when there is such a guarantee of exchange of power or change of power, why is a coup necessary, if at all? The reason is not far to seek. It is simple. Talon, despite his arguments to the contrary, is one of the people who is seen to be closer to the French administration of President Macron. Number two, all arms of government have now been emasculated. The legislature emasculated. The judiciary emasculated. Private sector emasculated. And he's chosen here Romualdo Wadagni, the current finance minister, is the one who is designated as his successor. And knowing as we do what happens in African elections is as good as the president if the elections were held. And what has happened, therefore, is that there are elements within the army who hold the view that the ballot cannot be trusted. And they are copying what we have seen happen in Guinea, in Mali, in Niger, and of course we have seen that also happening in Burkina Faso, happening in Guinea-Bissau, happening in Gabon. And that is the very reason why we had this coup or attempted coup that did not go too far. But the question is, why did the coup fail at all? Why did it not succeed? In my view, there are a number of reasons. Remember very quickly, the Nigerians sent in their planes there. And that, in my view, was a show of force that we are prepared to intervene. Whether they are doing so as the lead power in the ECOWAS region is a debate that we'll hold. But there is also suggestion that President Macron held certain conversations, seeing Benin as one of the few countries that still remain under the control of France. They have lost everything. They only remain with Côte d'Ivoire. They remain with Togo. Gabon, I think they have gained, because what happened must have been a cosmetic coup, seeing the reception that Macron recently received in Libreville. So that is the context in which we must understand. So I think there are elements within the armed forces which are still animated by ethnicity and loyalty. Remember, as I said, in the very early days of Hubert Maga, the country was dictated by ethnic politics, as I've read. The Bariba are a major tribe there. The Yoruba are also quite prominent, and the Fon and the Gawun are also quite prominent. So within the armed forces, I suspect that those particular realities still play. And coupled with financial interests, coupled with foreign influence, these individuals could not just succeed. In fact, I asked myself, as I saw the coup unfolding, I was moving from channel to channel, trying to monitor what was happening. And I asked a friend of mine who was in Porto Novo, but have they held Patrick Talon? If they haven't held him, then there is no coup. Because the very first thing that people do when they hold or try a coup d'etat, you make sure you have the leader or you are in control, but they did not. And that is why we were seeing gunfire around the presidential palace. And after that, it was neutralized. The details, of course, will come out a little later. But if I was to be asked in a nutshell, why is it that coup d'etats are now becoming the way of solving problems, particularly in what sometimes is referred to as Francophone Africa? The answer is simple. Many of these countries in the so-called Francophone Africa are controlled from Paris. People can pretty much predict what is going to happen. People are getting tired, they are getting poorer, their leaders are getting richer. And the people in the military are now seeing themselves as the saviors because the ballot has failed. And that is the context in which what happened in Benin happened. Of course, I know there will be attempts at sending a very clear message by punishing the coup, those who attempted the coup. But let us not speculate. Let us wait and see. Remember that ECOWAS has found itself in a very difficult situation in the recent past. They have found themselves in a difficult situation in the cases of the coups that we know about in Guinea, in Niger, in Mali, in Burkina, and of course, recently in Guinea-Bissau. And what they have done very quickly without much thought and assessment, in my view, is to say, we are not going to cooperate with you. And how did the Sahelian countries respond? They responded by saying, we are withdrawing from ECOWAS, and they did in the month of January this year. Burkina withdrew, Mali withdrew, and Niger withdrew. And initially what they tried to do, particularly in the case of Niger, was to threaten military action. And they are now coming out very firmly because they fear that if this trend continues, and it may very well continue, then ECOWAS will have very few members, because these countries that are going through these processes will then want to join what they are considering to be a more progressive alliance, which is being created in the Sahel. So ECOWAS is trying to redeem itself by saying we must do something. And you could see that this is much more reminiscent of what they did in the case of Yahya Jammeh in the Gambia. And Nigeria perhaps is a little bit more concerned this time round because this is too close to home. So that you have a situation where in the north you have Niger, and you are now beginning to have attempts which are too close to home. And I think people are getting worried, even in spaces such as Nigeria, because coup d'etats are sometimes copycat. People see it has happened there. The ballot is not working. Why don't we save the people? So they are the latter-day saviors. So we see an attempt at redemption by the ECOWAS group, led as it must be by Nigeria. You know, of course, there are no exact answers because this is not an exact science. But remember that there is what I call the scramble for Africa. Remember also that Nigeria is a regional power. Remember also that there is another power called France, which is desperate, losing her territories, as it were. In the mind of France, countries such as Benin are what they used to call during the colonial period the territoire d'outre-mer. These are the external territories. And that mindset is still alive and well. So Nigeria, in some ways, may be lending itself to being used to stop these coups, to stop what they call, what the African Union has characterized as unconstitutional changes of power, and therefore contrary to the Malabo Declaration on unconstitutional changes of power. Of course, that does not mean that there are no domestic problems within Nigeria. They are numerous. We've seen quite a number of abductions and kidnappings in different states of Nigeria, such as Kebbi, Borno, Kwara State. So some are saying, and I've had some friends of mine from Benin say they should leave us alone. But remember, Benin is very small. And for that reason, it can very easily be decimated by Nigeria. And those are realities that you cannot rule out. You know, I sometimes, it's very interesting. France is a unique colonizer. It is unique in the sense that it is one that from an analyst's perspective has been rejected the most by its former colonizers. And that rejection has economic implications. So that when we see the desperation, it is because of economic reasons. If recent reports are true in Burkina Faso, they are trying to seize or take by some compensation the assets of Total Energies. So if you get into a space like Benin, which has a major seaport in Porto Novo, you are finding yourself as France in a situation where your space is becoming smaller and smaller. I do not know whether Macron has confirmed or denied that there was a phone call, but be that as it may, I think there was some communication. Whether it's a phone call or not, we do not know, but some communication is going on. And this is the case of a leader and a European power that is losing ground on a daily basis. Losing ground, and its economic territory is disappearing. It is not only in Benin. They are struggling in Algeria. They are struggling in the Sahel. And they are struggling even in Europe, where they want to be a power. They are struggling. So Macron's behavior must be seen in the context of a power whose fortunes are dwindling, and therefore is becoming more and more desperate. And in that desperation, they will want to ensure that they retain such territories as they consider susceptible to their manipulation, and individuals whom they think are still beholden to them. We have seen that in the case of Ouattara in La Côte d'Ivoire, and we are now seeing that in the case of Patrice Talon in Benin. So that is a desperate France. And I think, I may be wrong, but I believe that they are going to be the chair of the G7 very soon, and they don't want to get into that space with their wings clipped, and they are being clipped on a daily basis, because as a result of this attempted coup, Benin will never be the same again, because there is definitely going to be a purge of the attempted coup makers. And you will have this purge so close to January, when you have your legislative election, so close to the presidential elections, which are due in the month of April, with an opposition which I believe will now be much more revived. And that opposition is not going to look to France,